They say the 1970s were the years when Detroit lost its roar. Big names shrank, proud badges faded, and machines once born for glory stumbled into the shadows. Today, we revisit the 10 cars that carried those mistakes on their shoulders, the ones Detroit quietly hopes you will forget. For many of you, this is more than a story about cars, but a fragment of youth now softened by time. If you enjoy journeys like this, consider joining American Muscle Soul. The 1979 Nova stood at the edge of a decade that had worn the life out of so many Detroit machines. Its small block carried only 305 cubic inches, a tired breath for a body that felt heavier than the hopes once placed upon it. Quarter-mile times drifted past 19 long seconds, and the speedometer surrendered just before 100 miles an hour, a quiet confession that its fighting days were over. The shape that had once hinted at a sharp, compact bruiser now seemed unsure of itself, softened by years of compromises and fading ambition. Even its final production run, fewer than 98,000 cars, felt like a whispered farewell to a nameplate that had once mattered. The Nova had not just lost power, it had lost its place. What remains is a kind of melancholy beauty, the kind you see when something familiar grows dim, yet still carries the outline of what it used to be. Many of you may understand that feeling more deeply than you let on, because some things decline the way people do, quietly and with a dignity that hurts to witness. If these fading stories of American iron still speak to you, consider subscribing to American Muscle Soul, where the past is remembered with the respect it deserves. The 1977 Trans Am wore its beauty like a mask, polished and proud, yet unable to hide the truth beneath its skin. Its 400 cubic inch heart still rumbled with the memory of better years, but 200 lonely horsepower could no longer carry the legend it once upheld. Quarter-mile runs lingered in the mid-16-second range, the needle settling near 110 miles an hour, as if the car itself hesitated to admit how far the 70s had pulled it from greatness. Its sharp new face, the square lamps and bold shaker hood, tried to convince the world that Pontiac had not lost its way. Even fame could not save it. When Smokey and the Bandit turned this car into a cultural icon, crowds saw only the black and gold shimmer, not the compromises written into every softened line and every muted shift of its weary V8. Behind the glamour lived a truth Detroit hoped you would forget. This Trans Am was surviving, not soaring. The rise and fall of the Trans Am also reflect the common challenges that American car manufacturers had to confront in the 1,970 seconds, such as the energy crisis and new environmental regulations. However, the legacy of the Trans Am is still recognized and greatly contributes to the golden era of muscle cars in America. If this car stirred something in you, tell me by leaving the number 1 if you like it or the number 0 if you do not. The 1977 Skylark carried a name that once meant fire and elegance, yet by the time it reached the showroom, its spark had faded into a tired glow. Its V8 options, from the modest 301 cubic inches to the larger 350, struggled to push the car beyond a quiet 100 miles an hour. The run from 0 to 60 wandered past 15 long seconds, a gentle reminder that the muscle once promised by this badge had been traded for caution and compromise. The redesigned front end, heavy with chrome bars and softened contours, spoke more about survival than spirit. Even the 5.7-liter option, barely touching the mid-100 horsepower range, felt like an apology for what the Skylark had been when Buick still built machines with real thunder in their lungs. Quarter-mile attempts showed no urgency, as if the car itself understood it no longer belonged among the legends it once stood beside. This Skylark became a quiet symbol of Detroit's confusion, a moment in time when old names were kept alive without the power to honor them. And perhaps that is why its decline still lingers in memory, not because it failed loudly, but because it faded gently. The 1976 Mustang II arrived in a moment when Detroit was shrinking its dreams, and the car wore that uncertainty in every line of its small and cautious frame. Its 2.3-liter heart, barely 92 horsepower, strained against a world that once expected Mustangs to run wild. Even the 302 cubic inch V8 in the King Cobra barely reached 134 horsepower, a figure that would have seemed unthinkable in the glory years. The run to 60 felt sluggish, drifting past 11 long seconds, and quarter-mile attempts stretched into the high 17-second range, as if the car itself knew it no longer carried the fire of its ancestors. The design that once turned heads now seemed caught between luxury compact and compromised performance, a shape more Pinto than pony car. Yet beneath the disappointment lived a truth many forget. This modest machine, so often mocked, kept the Mustang name alive at a time when rising fuel costs and heavy regulations nearly silenced it forever. It survived because it had to, not because it soared. Clearly, the significant decline in design and performance of the 1976 Mustang II has damaged its long-standing legacy and reputation. This could be considered one of the worst periods in the developmental history of the Mustang, reflecting the influence of economic and environmental factors at that time. Do you share the same viewpoint? Let me know. The 1976 Charger Daytona carried a name far too heavy for the car beneath it. The word Daytona once meant a wind-carved nose, a towering wing, and a 426 cubic inch heart that shook grandstands. What arrived in the mid-70s was a quiet echo of that legend. A personal luxury coupe dressed in decals that could not hide its weight or its hesitation. Its 400 cubic inch V8 barely mustered 185 horsepower, and its run to 60 slipped past 11 long seconds, with quarter-mile attempts drifting into the high 18-second range. Even its top speed, circling 100 miles an hour, felt like a whisper compared to the roar that name once carried. The softened body lines and heavy proportions spoke of a market chasing comfort rather than fire. It was the clearest sign that Detroit had chosen to preserve an emblem instead of honoring it with power, and the old fans knew it. The Daytona badge, once untouchable, suddenly felt borrowed, stretched across a machine built for a different decade and a different purpose. Yet, there is something strangely human in watching a legend fade, as if the car itself remembered who it once was, but could not find the strength to become it again. Are you still watching our video? Comment 5 or like this video to let me know you are a muscle car enthusiast. The 1975 Camaro carried the silhouette of a street brawler, yet the fire beneath its skin had dimmed to a measured glow. Its 350 cubic inch LM1 small block could summon only 155 horsepower, a far cry from the thunder that once defined the badge. The throttle felt cautious, the climb to 60 slow and restrained, and each quarter-mile run revealed a car holding itself back rather than surging forward. The absence of the Z28 package spoke louder than any exhaust note. It marked a turning point, a moment when Chevy chose compliance over combat. Yet many have argued that calling this Camaro a total failure misses the truth of its time. During the energy crisis, automakers faced rules that tightened like a vice. Emissions controls, fuel anxieties, and new federal mandates forced Detroit to tame engines that once shook the pavement. This Camaro did not fall short by choice. It bent because it had no room to stand tall. Its body still looked ready for a fight, the wraparound glass and familiar lines whispering of better days. But underneath lived a machine shaped by caution, built to survive a decade that feared excess. The 1975 Camaro remains a reminder that even legends must sometimes bow to the world around them, carrying the memory of their strength in silence. The 1974 Barracuda carried the shape of a predator, yet beneath that long hood lived a truth the decade could not hide. The mighty 426 and 440 engines that once made this car a street legend had vanished, replaced by a 360 cubic inch V8 that offered 245 horsepower and a quieter 320 pound-feet of torque. It could still reach 60 in roughly 8 seconds and run a quarter mile in the mid-15s. But the wild edge that defined the early Cuda had softened into something more cautious. The body remained bold and low, yet the heavy impact bumpers and the weight of new regulations gave it a stiffness the earlier cars never carried. Plymouth kept the look alive while the spirit beneath it faded, holding on to a silhouette that no longer matched the strength of the machine. And when production ended that year, the Barracuda name slipped away without a successor, a rare moment when Detroit chose silence rather than drag a legend into further decline. There is a bittersweet beauty in this final chapter. The last Cuda stood not as a triumph, but as a reminder that even icons must surrender to time, law, and circumstance. The 1974 Javelin AMX still carried the long hood and wide-shouldered stance that once made it a champion, yet beneath that confident silhouette lived the weight of a decade closing in. Its 401 cubic inch V8 could summon about 235 horsepower and a steady 345 pound-feet of torque, enough to push the car to 60 in roughly 8 seconds and through the quarter-mile in the mid-15-second range. Respectable numbers for its time, but a softened echo of the machines that had ruled the streets only a few years before. The heavy bumpers required by new federal rules pulled at the lines of the body, giving the car a grounded look that felt more resigned than defiant. AMC kept the AMX name alive through appearance and handling packages, yet the fire that once made the badge a terror in Trans Am racing had dimmed. This was a car built with memories of victory, struggling to adapt to an era that no longer welcomed muscle. Even so, fragments of its past survived in the steering response, in the grit of its exhaust, and in the way the chassis seemed to remember the days when Mark Donohue and Roger Penske carried AMC to glory. The 1974 AMX stands as a reminder of a company fighting hard against time, regulation, and shrinking resources. It was the last of its line, a final note held just long enough before silence took over. The 1973 Cougar XR7 still carried the long, elegant lines that once made it the more refined cousin of the Mustang, yet those lines no longer hid the weight that time had added to its shoulders. Beneath its hood lay a 351 cubic inch V8 that could offer barely more than a modest 180 horsepower, numbers that struggled to move a body creeping toward 4,000 pounds. The rush to 60 now stretched past 12 quiet seconds, and the quarter-mile faded into the high 18-second range, a far cry from the days when the Eliminator badge roared with intent. Its softened shape and broad chrome grille spoke of a new identity, one aimed at luxury rather than speed. Safety bumpers sat heavy on the nose, and the ride that once felt sharp had dissolved into something gentle and distant. The transformation disappointed many who remembered when the Cougar was praised as sexier than the Mustang, when it shared engines that breathed 390 cubic inches of real force. By 1973, that spirit had slipped away, replaced with a grand touring calm that felt like a quiet surrender. There is a certain sadness in watching a car trade its youthful fire for comfort it never truly asked for. The XR7 became a symbol of a decade that reshaped legends until they barely recognized themselves. The 1972 Montego GT carried the stance of a grand touring bruiser, yet the strength beneath its long, sweeping hood told a different story. Its 429 cubic inch V8, once a symbol of unrestrained Mercury power, could offer only a little more than 200 horsepower in an era tightened by emissions and fear of fuel shortages. The push to 60 drifted beyond 11 seconds, and the quarter-mile settled into the high 16-second range, as if the weight of the decade itself held the car back. Even its top speed, circling a modest 100 miles an hour, hinted at the restraint built into every part of the machine. The design was bold on the surface, sharing its foundation with the Torino sports roof, but its size and softness betrayed the athletic intent its badge tried to promise. The split chrome grille, the flowing roofline, and the luxury-framed interior belonged to a car caught between muscle and refinement, unable to claim either identity fully. Mercury had shaped a machine that looked ready to run, yet was built to cruise gently, a contradiction that echoed the struggles of a brand searching for purpose in changing times. There is a quiet sadness in seeing a car that wanted to be more, yet was shaped by forces beyond its control. The Montego GT stands as a reminder that not every ambition survives the world that surrounds it, and that some legends fade not with a roar, but with a sigh. The 70s reshaped every muscle icon we thought we knew, leaving behind stories that still echo through steel and memory. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten machines, let your voice be heard with a like, and join us at American Muscle Soul so you never miss the next journey into the past. Your support keeps these stories alive.